"Grandma, why do you never go to your cabin anymore?" My granddaughter Lily asked that question so casually that at first I thought I had misunderstood her. The conversation around the table continued for half a second before something strange happened. Silence arrived all at once. Forks stopped moving. Glasses remained suspended in midair. Even the laughter that had filled the dining room only moments earlier seemed to vanish. I looked up from my slice of birthday cake and stared at Lily. She was 12 years old, bright, curious, and completely unaware of what she had just done. "My cabin?" I asked with a small laugh. "Sweetheart, I do not have a cabin." Lily frowned. "Yes, you do." Across the table, my daughter-in-law Jennifer immediately reached for her water glass. "Lily, honey, maybe you are confused," she said lightly. Her smile was perfect. Too perfect. "No, I am not," Lily replied. "The one by the lake." Nobody said a word. My son Michael suddenly became very interested in the napkin beside his plate. Jennifer glanced at him for a fraction of a second before looking back at Lily. It was a tiny moment. Most people would not have noticed it. I did. At 72 years old, I had spent a lifetime reading people. Before retirement, I worked as a school counselor. Children rarely lied well. Adults were far more complicated. "What lake?" I asked gently. Lily opened her mouth to answer, but Jennifer interrupted. "Who wants more cake?" she said cheerfully. The abrupt change of subject landed in the room like a dropped plate. Nobody moved. Nobody answered. Then Michael cleared his throat. "Actually, I think I will have another piece." The conversation slowly restarted. Someone mentioned football. Someone else commented on the weather. Within a minute, everyone was pretending nothing unusual had happened. Everyone except me. For the rest of the evening, I smiled when appropriate. I laughed when expected. I thanked everyone for celebrating my birthday. Yet my thoughts kept returning to Lily's question. "Why do you never go to your cabin anymore?" The wording bothered me most. Not "do you have a cabin?" Not "have you ever been to a cabin?" She spoke as if it already belonged to me. As if I had visited it before. As if everyone knew about it except me. Later that night, after the guests left and the dishes were washed, I sat alone in my Nashville kitchen. The house felt unusually quiet. A birthday card from Lily rested beside a vase of flowers on the table. Outside, a gentle rain tapped against the windows. I poured myself a cup of tea and tried to convince myself the whole thing meant nothing. Children mixed up stories all the time. Maybe she had heard something incorrectly. Maybe she was talking about someone else's property. Maybe. Yet the memory refused to leave me. What troubled me even more was the reaction around the table. Not Lily's question. The silence that followed it. I closed my eyes and replayed the moment again. Jennifer changing the subject. Michael avoiding eye contact. The sudden tension that swept through the room. Those were not the reactions of people correcting a simple misunderstanding. Those were the reactions of people hoping a conversation would end before it truly began. I stared into my tea for a long moment. Then I remembered something my late husband once told me years before he passed away. One day, he had said with a smile, "You will finally see what I built for us." At the time, I thought he was talking about our family. Sitting alone in my kitchen that night, I began to wonder if he had meant something else entirely. The next morning, I told myself I was being ridiculous. By the time I finished breakfast, I had already created half a dozen explanations for Lily's question. Children overheard conversations and misunderstood details all the time. I had spent 30 years working with students. I knew how imagination could fill gaps in understanding. Yet the more I tried to dismiss it, the more uncomfortable I became. What finally pushed me out of the house was not curiosity. It was the memory of everyone's faces. Jennifer's smile had vanished for a second before she forced it back. Michael had looked down at the table. Even my son, who normally answered every question directly, had suddenly become quiet. I drove to a small diner a few miles from my neighborhood and ordered coffee. The place was nearly empty. Rain still lingered from the night before, tapping softly against the windows. I sat in a booth and stared at my phone. 3 times I considered calling Michael. 3 times I decided against it. If there was a simple explanation, I did not want to sound foolish. If there was not, I wanted to think before asking questions. As I stirred my coffee, another memory surfaced. About 4 years before my husband passed away, he had become unusually secretive about certain errands. Not suspicious, just protective. Every few months, he would disappear for an afternoon and return in an exceptionally good mood. Whenever I asked where he had been, he would smile and say, "Working on a surprise." At the time, I assumed it was one of his hobbies. Now, sitting alone in that diner, I wondered if those afternoons had something to do with what Lily mentioned. By noon, I found myself searching through old boxes in the attic. Most contained family photographs, holiday decorations, and paperwork I had not touched in years. Dust floated through the sunlight as I opened one container after another. For nearly 2 hours, I found nothing unusual. Then I discovered a small envelope tucked inside an old scrapbook. My name was written across the front in my husband's handwriting. My pulse quickened. Inside was a folded note. The paper had yellowed with age. The message was short. If you are reading this, I hope you finally decided to stop throwing old things away. Some treasures are worth keeping. Love always, Daniel. I smiled despite myself. That sounded exactly like him. Then I noticed something written beneath the message. A single line. An address. No explanation. No description. Just an address outside Nashville that I did not recognize. I stared at it for several seconds. The location meant nothing to me, yet something about it felt important. My husband had been many things, but he was never careless. If he wrote down an address and hid it inside a scrapbook, he had a reason. That evening, I entered the address into my computer. The map loaded slowly. When the image finally appeared, my breath caught in my throat. The location was beside a lake. And for the first time since Lily asked her innocent question, I began to suspect that she had not been confused at all. For the next 2 days, I did not tell anyone about the address. Not Michael. Not Lily. Certainly not Jennifer. Part of me felt foolish for treating a faded note and a map location as something important. Another part of me could not stop thinking about it. The more I reflected on the past, the more small details began lining up in ways that made me uncomfortable. Daniel had always handled certain financial matters himself. I trusted him completely, so I never asked many questions. After he passed away, Jennifer often stepped in to help organize paperwork. At the time, I appreciated it. Grief has a way of making even simple tasks feel overwhelming. She would stop by with folders, explain forms, and assure me everything was under control. Looking back, I realized how often she had positioned herself between me and information. Not aggressively, not obviously, just enough that I rarely saw documents directly. On Thursday afternoon, Jennifer called. Her voice sounded warm and cheerful as always. She asked how I was feeling after my birthday. She asked whether I enjoyed the flowers. She even offered to bring over dinner sometime the following week. If a stranger had listened to the conversation, they would have heard a caring daughter-in-law. Yet now I found myself paying attention to what she did not say. She never mentioned Lily's question. Not once. When the call ended, I sat quietly for several minutes. Then I made a decision. The following morning, I drove to the address from Daniel's note. The trip took a little over an hour. Nashville gradually disappeared behind me as winding roads carried me through rolling hills and wooded areas. The farther I drove, the more nervous I became. I kept telling myself there would be a simple explanation waiting at the end. Maybe an old vacation rental. Maybe property that had long ago been sold. Maybe nothing at all. Eventually, I turned onto a narrow road that followed the edge of a lake. The water shimmered beneath the morning sun. It was beautiful, peaceful, the kind of place people dreamed about retiring to. Then I saw it. A cabin stood among tall trees overlooking the shoreline. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. It looked familiar somehow, even though I knew I had never been there. I parked across the road and stared. A porch swing, blue shutters, stone steps leading toward the water, details that felt strangely personal. Then something caught my attention. Near the mailbox stood a wooden sign. I could not read it clearly from where I sat. After a moment, I stepped out of the car and walked closer. The sign was weathered but still readable. My breath caught instantly. The name carved into the wood was Parker, not someone else's name. Mine. For several seconds, I simply stood there listening to the wind move through the trees. Then a front door opened. Someone stepped onto the porch carrying a coffee mug. And the moment I recognized who it was, every explanation I had created for the past 3 days vanished. The person standing on the porch was Jennifer. For a moment, I genuinely wondered whether I was imagining things. She wore jeans, a light sweater, and the relaxed expression of someone spending a peaceful morning at a place she knew well. Not visiting, not exploring, belonging. She took a sip from her coffee and looked out across the lake as if she had done it 100 times before. Then she turned and disappeared back inside. I remained frozen beside the mailbox. My first reaction was anger. My second was confusion. Neither lasted very long. What replaced them was something far more unsettling. Questions. Too many questions. Why was Jennifer here? Why did the property carry the Parker name? Why had nobody ever mentioned it? And most importantly, why had Lily assumed I already knew about it? I returned to my car and sat quietly with the engine off. The cabin stood less than 100 yards away. I could hear birds in the trees and water gently touching the shoreline. Everything about the scene felt calm except my thoughts. I considered walking to the front door. I considered calling Michael. I considered turning around and driving home. Instead, I waited. About 20 minutes later, another vehicle pulled into the driveway. My heart skipped when I recognized it. It belonged to Michael. He stepped out carrying a paper bag and walked toward the porch. Jennifer opened the door before he even reached it. They greeted each other casually and disappeared inside. I stared at the cabin in disbelief. If Michael was involved, then everything changed. The possibility sat heavily in my chest during the entire drive home. By the time I reached Nashville, I had convinced myself that perhaps the cabin belonged to my son. Perhaps Daniel had purchased it for him years ago. Perhaps Lily simply misunderstood whose property it was. That explanation felt reasonable, yet it collapsed later that evening. Around 7 o'clock, Michael called to check on me. His voice sounded completely normal. He asked whether I had arrived home safely from running errands. He asked whether I needed groceries. Then he mentioned spending the entire day showing properties to clients across town. I nearly dropped the phone. Entire day? Across town. I had watched him walk into the cabin only hours earlier. The realization left me speechless. Either my son had just lied to me, or something far stranger was happening. After we ended the call, I sat in my living room staring at an old photograph of Daniel on the mantel. The longer I looked at it, the more another memory surfaced. A conversation from years ago. We had been discussing retirement plans. Daniel smiled and said, "One day there will be a place where the whole family can gather without rushing home." At the time, I thought he was dreaming out loud. Now I was no longer sure. Before going to bed, I opened my laptop again and searched property records connected to the lake address. I expected to find answers. Instead, I found something that made even less sense. According to the county database, the current ownership information was restricted from public view, and next to the property file was a note indicating that access authorization had been updated 3 years earlier. The next morning, I called Robert Gaines. If there was one person who understood how Daniel handled important matters, it was Robert. They had been friends for more than 40 years. Fishing trips, business ventures, family vacations, countless weekends spent talking on back porches and lake docks. If anyone knew whether my husband had ever owned a cabin, it would be him. Robert answered on the second ring. The moment he heard my voice, he knew something was wrong. "Evelyn," he said, "what happened?" An hour later, we were sitting together in a quiet corner of a local diner. I told him everything. Lily's question, the address, the cabin, Jennifer, Michael, the restricted property records. Robert listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and stared out the window for several seconds. "That is interesting," he finally said. Interesting was not the word I would have chosen. "Do you know something?" I asked. Robert sighed. A few years before Daniel passed away, he asked me for advice about a property purchase. My pulse quickened. "A cabin?" He nodded slowly. "A lake property." The diner suddenly felt much quieter. "Why did he buy it?" Robert smiled sadly. "For you." I stared at him. "What?" He talked about it constantly. Said you spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. Said you deserved a peaceful place to enjoy retirement. My hands tightened around my coffee cup. Robert continued. He wanted it to be a surprise until everything was finished. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that had been haunting me for days. Did he ever mention Jennifer? Robert's expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. Not at first, he said carefully. But after Daniel became sick, he worried about paperwork. He mentioned needing help managing certain documents if anything happened to him. My stomach sank. And Robert looked directly at me. Jennifer offered to help. The words settled heavily between us. Everything still had a reasonable explanation. Everything still could have been innocent. Yet the pattern kept growing. Before we left, Robert told me there might be something else. Several years ago, Daniel had given him a sealed folder for safekeeping. Robert had completely forgotten about it until our conversation. I think it is still in my home office, he said. I have not opened it. We drove separately to his house. 20 minutes later, we were standing in front of an old filing cabinet in a spare bedroom. Robert searched through drawers for nearly 10 minutes before finally pulling out a thick manila folder. Dust covered the edges. My name was written across the front. Evelyn Parker. Neither of us spoke. Slowly, Robert handed it to me. My hands trembled as I opened the flap. Inside were documents. Property records. Insurance papers. Correspondence. Everything organized carefully by Daniel himself. Then I found a letter clipped to the very top. The date was from 6 months before his death. I unfolded the paper and began reading. By the third sentence, my heart was pounding. Because according to Daniel's own words, someone had already started interfering with information meant for me years before he passed away. Robert and I sat in silence as I continued reading Daniel's letter. His handwriting was steady, deliberate, unmistakably his. The first page described the cabin and how much joy he hoped it would bring me one day. The second page was different. The tone changed. It became cautious, concerned. Daniel wrote that several pieces of correspondence connected to the property had failed to reach him. At first he blamed postal errors. Then he noticed something stranger. Documents he expected me to receive somehow ended up being discussed by other people before either of us had seen them. One sentence stood out immediately. I do not know whether this is carelessness or interference, but I am beginning to worry that information intended for Evelyn is not always reaching Evelyn. I lowered the letter and looked at Robert. Neither of us spoke. The words were nearly 4 years old. Daniel had suspected something long before anyone else. I returned to the folder. Inside were copies of property records, maintenance agreements, insurance forms, and photographs showing the cabin during construction. In every picture, Daniel looked proud, excited, hopeful. Then I found another document. It was a list of authorized contacts connected to the property. My name appeared first. Daniel's name appeared second. A third name had been added later. Jennifer Parker. My stomach tightened. When was this updated? I asked. Robert adjusted his glasses and examined the page. About 3 years ago. 3 years. The same time period listed on the county database when authorization records had changed. The same time period when Lily's question suggested everyone knew something I did not. The same time period shortly after Daniel passed away. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Yet something still bothered me. Michael. If Jennifer had access, what role had my son played in all of this? Had he known? Had he approved it? Or had he simply trusted the wrong person? That evening, I returned home carrying the folder. Sleep was impossible. I spread the documents across my dining room table and began organizing them chronologically. Around midnight, I noticed something unusual. Several letters referenced quarterly statements. Yet those statements were missing from the file. Daniel had saved everything. He was meticulous. Missing documents were rare. I searched every pocket of the folder twice before finally discovering a smaller envelope hidden inside the back cover. It had never been sealed. I opened it carefully. Inside were copies of account summaries connected to a trust. My trust. The balances were substantial, far larger than I expected. Beneath the statements sat a handwritten note from Daniel. If anything happens to me, these funds should help Evelyn enjoy the retirement she deserves. I stared at the numbers. For years, I had worried about expenses. I postponed home repairs. I delayed replacing old appliances. I even skipped a few trips because I wanted to be careful with money. Yet according to the records in front of me, resources had been set aside specifically to prevent those struggles. My heart pounded as I reviewed the transaction history. Then I noticed something that made me stop breathing for a moment. Several distributions had been issued after Daniel's death. According to the records, the money had been sent regularly. Every quarter. Every year. But I had never received a single dollar. I spent most of the night staring at those trust statements. Every time I reached the final page, I started over again, convinced I had misunderstood something. The numbers remained the same. The dates remained the same. The distributions had been issued exactly as Daniel intended. Yet none of them had ever appeared in my accounts. By sunrise, exhaustion had replaced shock. I needed answers. Not assumptions. Not theories. Answers. The first call I made that morning was to the trust administrator listed in the documents. After several transfers, I was connected with a representative named Karen. She was professional, polite, and immediately cautious when I explained who I was. "Mrs. Parker," she said, "for security reasons, I will need to verify some information. 10 minutes later, her tone had changed completely. According to our records, distributions have been sent successfully for years. My grip tightened on the phone. To where? There was a brief pause. The designated account associated with your file. That is impossible, I said. I never received them. Silence filled the line. Then Karen asked a question that made my stomach drop. Mrs. Parker, are you saying the account ending in 4672 does not belong to you? I had never heard those numbers before in my life. Karen became noticeably more serious. I think it would be best if we scheduled a formal review. After the call ended, I immediately contacted Robert. Within an hour, we were sitting together in his office reviewing copies of every document we could find. The deeper we looked, the stranger everything became. Someone had not simply redirected information. Someone had created an entirely separate path through which money, notices, and account updates could flow without reaching me. Yet one detail refused to fit. If Jennifer was involved, how had she gained that level of access? She could not have done it alone. Maybe Michael knew, I said quietly. The words felt terrible the moment I spoke them. Robert looked at me carefully. Do you believe that? I wanted to say no. Instead, I remembered the cabin. I remembered watching him walk through that front door. I remembered his phone call claiming he had been elsewhere all day. I do not know what to believe anymore, I admitted. That afternoon, I drove to Michael's office without warning. Part of me hated what I was doing. Another part needed to see his reaction face to face. When I arrived, his assistant greeted me warmly and led me toward his office. Before she opened the door, I heard Michael speaking with someone inside. Jennifer. I froze. Neither of them knew I was there. We cannot keep delaying this, Jennifer said. Her voice sounded tense. The property situation needs to be finalized. My pulse quickened. Michael answered immediately. I already told you I am uncomfortable with it. For several seconds, I simply stood there. Uncomfortable with it. Not defending it. Not approving it. Uncomfortable with it. Suddenly, the certainty I had built over the past 24 hours began to crack. Then Jennifer spoke again. And what she said next changed everything I thought I understood about my son. Your mother was supposed to know eventually. Jennifer's voice came through the partially open office door. Every muscle in my body went still. Inside the room, silence followed. Then Michael spoke. That is not the point. His frustration was obvious. The point is that she does not know. She never knew. I stood frozen outside the doorway, unable to move. For the first time since this began, I was hearing something neither of them intended me to hear. Jennifer exhaled sharply. Michael, your father created a complicated situation. No, he replied. Dad created a simple situation. Mom was supposed to receive what belonged to her. My heart pounded. The words hit me harder than I expected. For days, I had been preparing myself to discover that my son had betrayed me. Now, listening to him defend me when he thought I was not there, I felt shame creep into my chest. I had doubted him. Inside the office, Jennifer's tone softened. I was trying to protect the family. From what? Michael asked. She did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. From losing everything. Another silence followed. Then Michael said something that confused me completely. We never would have lost everything. Jennifer laughed bitterly. That is easy to say now. I leaned closer. 3 years ago, your business was struggling. The market was uncertain. Lily was younger. We had expenses everywhere. I made decisions based on what I thought was best. My breath caught. Suddenly, a different picture began forming. Not a complete picture, but a different one. Those were not your decisions to make, Michael replied. Jennifer did not argue. The absence of a defense felt more powerful than any excuse. After a few moments, I stepped away from the office door before either of them could discover me. My mind was racing. For the first time, I understood that greed might not be the whole story. Fear, desperation, rationalization. Those things could be just as dangerous. Yet none of them explained why I had never been told the truth. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was Lily. Her cheerful voice immediately brightened my mood. We talked about school, a science project, and an upcoming field trip. Then, just before hanging up, she said something unexpected. Grandma, can I ask you something? The question made me smile despite everything. Of course. Did Grandpa ever have a wooden box in his office? My heart skipped. What kind of box? An old one with brass corners. I sat up straighter. Why? Because I found one a few years ago when Mom was cleaning things out. Every instinct in my body activated at once. What happened to it? Lily thought for a moment. I do not know, but I remember Grandpa's name was on it. And I remember Mom getting upset when I opened it. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Lily, I asked carefully, did you see what was inside? Just papers, she said. And a key. A key. My pulse quickened. Do you remember anything else? Another pause. Then Lily answered with a detail that sent a chill through me. The key had a little blue tag attached to it. And I think the tag had the same lake name that was on a picture hanging in our hallway. After ending the call with Lily, I sat motionless in my living room. The image would not leave my mind. An old wooden box. Important papers. A key with a blue tag. Jennifer becoming upset when a child accidentally opened it. None of those details proved anything on their own. Yet together they felt like pieces of a puzzle slowly moving into place. The following morning, I called Robert and told him everything Lily remembered. He listened carefully before asking a question I had not considered. Did Lily ever say what happened to the box? I shook my head before remembering he could not see me. No, only that she never saw it again. Robert was quiet for several seconds. Then we need to find it. Easier said than done. For all we knew, the box had been discarded years ago. Still, by noon, Robert and I had created a list of everything connected to the cabin, the trust, and Daniel's records. As we compared timelines, another pattern emerged. Nearly every unusual change had occurred during the same 12-month period after Daniel passed away. Authorization updates, redirected correspondence, account modifications, property access changes. The concentration of activity was impossible to ignore. Someone had moved quickly. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Michael. His voice sounded tired. Mom, can we have dinner tomorrow? My heart immediately became cautious. Why? There was a pause. Because there are things we need to talk about. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he added something that surprised me. And before you ask, no, I do not think Jennifer should be there. After we ended the call, I stared at my phone for a long time. The distance between suspicion and certainty had been shrinking every day. Yet somehow I still felt unprepared for whatever came next. The following evening, Michael arrived alone. We met at a quiet restaurant near the edge of town. He looked older than he had a week earlier. Stress had a way of doing that. After we ordered, neither of us touched the menus again. Finally, Michael leaned forward. Mom, I need you to tell me something honestly. I nodded. Have you been investigating Dad's property? The directness of the question caught me off guard. For a moment, I considered denying it. Instead, I answered truthfully. Yes. Michael closed his eyes briefly. Not in anger. In resignation. I was afraid of that. My stomach tightened. Afraid because you knew something? He looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the table. It was old, worn at the corners. My name was written across the front in Daniel's handwriting. I felt the air leave my lungs. Where did you get this? Michael stared down at the envelope. Dad gave it to me 2 weeks before he passed away. The restaurant seemed to disappear around us. What is inside? I whispered. Michael's expression became unreadable. I never opened it. My heart pounded. Years of questions suddenly sat between us on a wooden table. Slowly, carefully, I reached for the envelope. Then Michael said the one thing I never expected to hear. Mom, I think Dad knew someone was planning to keep secrets from you. For several seconds, I simply stared at the envelope resting between us. The handwriting was unmistakable. Daniel had written my name thousands of times over the course of our marriage. Birthday cards, anniversary notes, grocery lists. Seeing those familiar letters now felt like hearing his voice across a great distance. Michael pushed the envelope gently toward me. I should have given it to you years ago, he said quietly. Dad told me to wait until I felt certain it was necessary. I looked up. Why did you wait? Pain crossed his face. Because I thought everything was fine. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter and a small key attached to a faded blue tag. My heart nearly stopped. A blue tag. Exactly what Lily had described. With trembling hands, I unfolded the letter. Daniel's words filled the page. He explained that he had created multiple safeguards to ensure I would always be financially secure. The cabin, the trust, several protected accounts. Then the tone changed. He wrote that if I was reading the letter unexpectedly late, something had likely gone wrong. He described concerns about information being redirected, concerns about trusted people receiving access beyond what was intended. concerns he could not fully prove before his health declined. I read each line twice. Then a final paragraph caught my attention. Michael, if you are the one delivering this letter, I need you to remember something. Mistakes made out of fear can still hurt the people we love. Do not confuse good intentions with good decisions. I lowered the page slowly. Michael was staring at the table. What does that mean? I asked. He exhaled heavily. It means I need to tell you the truth. My stomach tightened. All of it. Michael nodded. 3 years ago, my business was in trouble. Not failing, but struggling. Jennifer was terrified. She believed we could lose the house. She believed we could lose everything we worked for. I listened without interrupting. When paperwork connected to the trust and cabin started arriving, she became convinced those assets should remain available in case our family needed them. I felt a wave of disappointment wash through me. And you agreed? Michael shook his head immediately. Not at first. Then I made the worst mistake of my life. His voice dropped. I avoided asking questions because I was afraid of the answers. Silence settled between us. That answer hurt more than anger would have. He had not created the deception, but he had looked away from it. Did you know about the money? I asked. Not the full amount. He met my eyes. I knew some distributions existed. Jennifer always told me they were being managed according to Dad's instructions. For the first time, I believed him completely. Not because he was innocent, because he finally sounded honest. Then he reached into his briefcase and removed another folder. There is something else. I looked down at the documents. Property inquiries. Transfer requests. Proposed sale paperwork. The dates were recent. Very recent. Mom, Michael said quietly. Jennifer scheduled a meeting next week to sell the cabin. And according to these records, she still believes nobody knows it legally belongs to you. For the first time since Lily asked her innocent question, everything finally seemed connected. The cabin, the trust, the missing distributions, the redirected information, the blue key tag, the hidden paperwork. Every road led back to the same place. Yet what surprised me most was not the evidence. It was how tired I suddenly felt. Anger takes energy. So does suspicion. After days of questions, I found myself wanting something simple. The truth, no matter how unpleasant it might be. Michael and I sat together long after our meals had gone untouched. He answered every question I asked. Some answers hurt. Others brought relief. What mattered was that he finally stopped avoiding them. Does Jennifer know you showed me these documents? I asked. No, will she find out? Michael nodded. Eventually. He looked down at the transfer paperwork. Probably sooner than later. The cabin sale meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. 6 days away. 6 days before someone might attempt to sell property that legally belonged to me. As we reviewed the documents together, another detail emerged. Jennifer was not planning a private sale. She was arranging a presentation with potential buyers and advisors. Multiple people would be present. Public records would be discussed. Ownership documents would be reviewed. The irony was impossible to ignore. The very event she believed would secure her future might become the moment everything unraveled. The next morning, Robert joined us at my house. By noon, my dining room table was covered with folders, letters, statements, and photographs. For hours, we organized evidence into a timeline. Every document strengthened the same conclusion. Daniel had created a system intended to protect me. Over time, that system had been quietly redirected. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Piece by piece. The most revealing discovery came late that afternoon. Hidden among the trust records was a communication log showing who received official notifications over the years. My name appeared less frequently than expected. Another name appeared constantly. Jennifer Parker. I closed my eyes. Seeing it in writing felt different from suspecting it. Robert slid another page toward me. Look at the dates. I did. Most of the notifications coincided with major changes involving the property and accounts. Someone had not merely received information. Someone had controlled access to information. Before we could continue, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Lily stood on the porch holding her backpack. Mom and Dad are arguing again, she said softly. My heart sank. I invited her inside immediately. A few minutes later, she sat at my kitchen table drinking lemonade while Robert quietly moved documents out of sight. Then Lily said something none of us expected. Grandma, I found a picture. She opened her backpack and carefully removed a folded photograph. The image showed Daniel standing beside the cabin shortly after construction was completed. I smiled the moment I saw him. Then my smile disappeared. Standing beside Daniel was Jennifer. The photograph had been taken years before his death. Years before anyone claimed she became involved in managing paperwork. Lily pointed toward the corner of the picture. Grandpa wrote something on the back. I turned it over. There, in Daniel's handwriting, were 6 words that made the entire room fall silent. Only Evelyn should ever hold this key. For a long moment, nobody in my kitchen spoke. Robert stared at the photograph. Michael read the handwritten note twice. Lily looked back and forth between us, sensing that she had once again uncovered something important without fully understanding why. I turned the picture over in my hands. Daniel's words were clear. Only Evelyn should ever hold this key. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. Whatever plans he had made for the cabin, they centered on me. Not Michael, not Jennifer, me. The following Thursday arrived faster than I expected. Jennifer's property meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon at a lakeside conference center near the cabin. By then, Robert had assembled copies of every relevant document. The trust records, the authorization changes, the communication logs, Daniel's letters, the photograph, the account summaries. Years of hidden decisions compressed into a stack of folders. Shortly after 1 o'clock, Michael arrived at my house. He looked nervous. So did I. The difference was that neither of us planned to hide it anymore. During the drive to the lake, nobody talked much. The closer we came to the conference center, the more I thought about Lily's question. One innocent question. That was all it took. Not a lawyer, not an investigator, not a financial audit. A child asking something adults preferred not to answer. When we arrived, several vehicles already filled the parking lot. Real estate representatives, potential buyers, property consultants. Everything appeared professional and orderly. Through the large windows of the conference room, I could see Jennifer speaking confidently with a small group gathered around presentation materials. She looked completely comfortable, completely certain. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the trust distributions, the missing information, the years of silence. The feeling passed quickly. We entered together. Conversations continued for several seconds before people noticed us. Jennifer saw me first. The color drained from her face almost immediately. Michael stepped beside me. Robert carried the folders. Lily remained near the doorway. Nobody had expected all 4 of us to arrive together. The room became very quiet. One of the real estate representatives smiled politely. Can we help you? Before Jennifer could answer, I spoke. Yes, I believe you can. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. I walked toward the display table where property information had been arranged for prospective buyers. There, clearly visible, was a photograph of the cabin. My cabin. Before any discussions continue, I said, there is something everyone should know. Jennifer closed her eyes briefly. The gesture lasted less than a second. Yet it told me everything. She knew exactly what was coming. Robert opened the first folder. Michael placed copies of the ownership records on the table. Several people immediately began reading. The room remained silent except for the sound of turning pages. Then one of the advisors looked up. His expression had changed completely. According to these documents, he said carefully, the legal owner of this property is Evelyn Parker. Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. The truth was finally standing in the middle of the room where everyone could see it. And for the first time since this began, nobody was trying to change the subject.